They tried to take him away quietly. No announcement, no reason. Just a whispered order passed down the line. Step aside, you're relieved. But Sergeant Rowan Hale didn't move, because nothing was wrong. And he'd seen what happened in combat zones when you followed orders that didn't make sense. So he stood firm until two palace aides walked toward him and reached for his arm. That's when it happened. Princess Charlotte stepped forward, walked down the stairs alone, and stood right in front of the guard. Her words weren't shouted, not rehearsed, just two simple ones. He stays. Before I show you what happened next, and how those two words flipped the entire courtyard upside down, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, because this wasn't a scandal. This wasn't a mistake. This was a child rewriting royal tradition in front of the whole world. Windsor Castle wore late summer like an old coat, comfortable, familiar, worn in places, but touched with a glow of gold at the edges where the afternoon light pulled itself, lazily across stone that had stood for more than 800 years of English history. The towers rose steady and silent against a sky so blue it seemed painted, while the ancient walls, weathered by centuries of storms, now shimmered with warmth, as if proud to host yet another chapter of Britain's unfolding story. The forecourt, stretched out wide and polished, a sheet of pale stone that gleamed almost unnaturally beneath the clear sky. On ordinary days, it was a courtyard, a place where steps echoed against ancient masonry. Today, though, it had been transformed into something straight out of a royal postcard. Brass railings ran along the edges like lines of molten gold, glistening whenever the sun found them. Velvet ropes, thick and dark, held eager crowds back, forming a boundary between the realm of ordinary people and the world of ceremony that would soon begin. White-gloved musicians, members of the band who had rehearsed this moment countless times, adjusted their instruments beneath the shade of canvas tents, their brass polished to mirrors. Each note from their tuning drifted like a promise across the air, reminding those gathered that tradition was about to march forward again. For the tourists packed 3 deep behind barriers, this was not routine. This was magic brought to life. Before their eyes, American families clutched tiny Union Jacks, their children's arms draped with plastic crowns bought from gift shops outside the castle gates. Guidebooks, some stuffed with neon post-it notes, maps sticking out at awkward angles, rested clumsily in their hands as they whispered to one another about history, about monarchs whose names they half remembered from school. German couples, precise and prepared, carried cameras with long lenses. They adjusted them with the care of surgeons preparing scalpels. Every movement was deliberate, a twist of focus, a soft click of the dial, a murmur of agreement between them. Each wanted not just a picture, but the picture, an image that could freeze royalty in time, preserved for albums and living room frames. On the far edge, a Japanese broadcast crew had claimed the most strategic corner. Their equipment, tripods, shoulder rigs, coiled cables, looked like the machinery of war in miniature. A camera light blinked red, a warning that every second was being recorded. Every breath of this ceremony transmitted across oceans. They showed no sign of moving, no sign of fatigue, prepared to wait until the very last note of the day's pageantry drifted into silence. All leaned forward, pressing against the rails, their eyes straining, their cameras raised, their voices hushed. They squinted into the glow of the courtyard, ready for even the smallest glimpse of real royalty, and none of them noticed the man in scarlet already watching them back. Sergeant Rowan Hale stood 32 paces from the raised platform, second, from the center in the Coldstream Guard's formation. Every detail of him belonged to the tradition they had come to see. 6'2" in his polished black boots, his body perfectly straight beneath the towering bearskin that shaded his brow. His scarlet tunic, cut with a sharpness only military tailoring could achieve, blazed in the light like fire against the pale stone. At his shoulder rested the SA-80 rifle, gleaming, balanced with parade ground precision as though it were an extension of his arm rather than a weapon. But Hale's presence was not only for show. His body may have been rigid, unmoving in the discipline of centuries-old drill, but his eyes never stopped shifting. He was not gazing at the grandeur of the castle or the spectacle of tradition. He was scanning. At 36, Rowan Hale carried a kind of awareness that could not be drilled into a soldier in parades or polished by ceremonies. It was an awareness forged in places where looking away for even a second meant never coming home. 2 tours in Helmand Province had given him those eyes. Eyes that flickered over the crowd with quiet calculation. Eyes that measured distance automatically. How far from barrier to rope, from rope to platform, from tourist to guard. Eyes that searched not just for faces, but for the wrong movements, the wrong expressions, the subtle signs that marked threat, from innocence. The habit was buried so deep it had become part of him. A tilt of the head, a hand lingering too long in a pocket, a tourist's bag heavier than it should be. Each detail was noted, catalogued, measured against instinct. Hale knew what most here did not. That ceremony was fragile. Tradition was a thin veil stretched over reality. Beneath the gleam of brass and velvet ropes, beneath the magic of music and uniforms, the possibility of danger always lived. He had seen what happened when vigilance failed, when assumptions were made, when soldiers trusted silence instead of instinct. And so, as the tourists smiled and the cameras clicked, Sergeant Rowan Hale stood tall in his scarlet, the embodiment of ceremony to them, but in truth, a sentinel. He was not here to admire. He was here to ensure that nothing interrupted the script the world had come to witness. Yet the world did not know that today the script would be rewritten. Because this wasn't about a scandal waiting to break. It wasn't about mistakes that could be hidden with polished speeches. No, this was something else entirely. This was a child, young and unyielding, about to stand against centuries of royal tradition, and she would do it not in shadows, not in whispers, but in front of the whole world. And when she stepped forward, Sergeant Rowan Hale would be the first to see it happen. The scar tissue on Rowan Hale's shoulder still pulled tight whenever the weather shifted, a faint ache that never fully left him. It was a reminder etched into his body, the price of a roadside bomb that had ended his combat. Days in Afghanistan and delivered him here, to the ceremonial heart of Britain. Some of his mates had looked at this posting and called it a step down. No firefights, no patrols, no hard desert nights under hostile skies. Just standing still in scarlet while tourists pointed their cameras and children asked if they could touch the bearskin. But Hale never saw it that way. To him, the danger hadn't disappeared. It had only changed its costume. The threat here wore a different mask. In Helmand it had been men with rifles hidden in the dunes, explosives buried in dusty roads. In London, it could be a single man, with a knife, a car swerving the wrong way, or a moment of confusion in a crowd so large it moved like water. Guarding Windsor Castle, the palaces, the squares, it demanded another kind of vigilance. Quieter, sharper, but vigilance all the same. And right now, that old instinct, the one that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, was whispering again. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a pressure in his chest, the kind of quiet awareness that told him pieces weren't fitting the way they should. He began filing details, each one slotting into the mental checklist built over years of soldiering. A junior aide near the royal platform couldn't seem to hold still. Pacing in tight loops, his polished shoes scraping faint circles into the stone. His nervous energy clashed with the weight of the occasion, where every official was trained to move slowly, gracefully, with dignity. Hale noted the sharp difference, because in events like this, nerves meant something. A security man by the garden wall kept fidgeting with his earpiece. Not once, not twice, but over and over, as if waiting for words that weren't arriving. He tapped his finger against the wire, checked his lapel mic, scanned the ground, then touched the earpiece again. It wasn't routine, it was restless. A sign that he was either underprepared or hearing something he didn't know how to handle. Near the rope line's south corner, Hale counted the cameras. Too many. Yes, all had the right accreditation tags swinging from their necks, all looked professional enough. But there was something deliberate about the placement, angles too precise, lenses already trained before the moment had arrived. These weren't tourists hoping for snapshots. They were waiting, expectant, as though they knew exactly what they had come to capture. Hale didn't move. He didn't shift his weight or break his perfect stance. The rifle stayed poised, his posture rigid, every line of him matching the centuries of ceremony these crowds had come to see. But inside, he filed every detail away, building a quiet picture of unease. He had stood guard over presidents, prime ministers, foreign royals, even the Pope himself during that tense state visit when London had gone into lockdown. He knew the rhythm of these ceremonies like soldiers knew the rhythm of their heartbeat, the slow pacing, the deliberate timing, the choreographed minutes that stretched between drum beats. You didn't have to move to see everything. Sometimes the most important thing wasn't spotting what was there. It was noticing what didn't belong. Then the music struck. It began behind the archway, brass instruments swelling like a wave, rising out of stone itself. Notes bright and ceremonial lifted into the air, spilling over the forecourt, pulling cheers and applause from the crowd. Near the platform, cameras exploded into clicking bursts, shutters snapping like a rush of hail. Against glass, the main event was beginning. Hale stayed motionless, scarlet blazing under the sun, rifle steady. But deep in his chest, something ticked like a countdown. He couldn't name it yet, couldn't point to one thing and say that's the problem. But the feeling was there. Today wasn't going to follow the script. It began not with shouts, but with a whisper. Near the royal platform, two men in dark suits leaned together, their heads bent close. One carried a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. Their lips moved in tight conversation. Their words didn't reach Hale, but their urgency carried in the quickness of their glances, the sharpness of their nods. One man tilted his head toward the guards. The other responded with a clipped motion, a decision made in silence. Then, as though it were nothing unusual, one of them strode along the back of the platform with an authority that seemed borrowed, not earned. He moved like someone wearing a role that didn't quite fit. 30 paces away, Hale's eyes tracked it all. He didn't turn his head. He didn't twitch a muscle. But his gaze followed, catalogued, judged. Because he had seen this before, in Afghan compounds, in dusty villages where the wrong message at the wrong time meant the whole patrol walked into danger. Whispers moving in silence, orders passed that weren't truly orders. Authority borrowed, reshaped, and delivered just enough to fool those who wanted to believe. Here in Windsor's forecourt, the signs were the same. Different uniforms, different setting. But the pattern was identical. Something was being moved down the line that wasn't meant to be there. It took exactly 90 seconds. 90 seconds for the message to snake its way through the chain. From the suits to the aides, from the aides to the security men, from their shoulders to the earpieces pressed close against their skin. A nod here, a glance there. Words murmured low enough to disappear in the sound of brass and the applause of the crowd. Finally, the whisper reached Hale's flank. The liaison, positioned only steps away, shifted. His expression was controlled, but his eyes flickered for half a second, the way they always did when receiving instructions they hadn't expected. Hale's grip on the rifle didn't change. His body remained as still as the castle walls behind him. But inside, the whisper in his instincts grew louder. Something was wrong. And if there was one thing Rowan Hale had learned, on foreign roads where smoke rose from the sand, and here beneath the Union Jack fluttering bright against a summer sky, it was this. Whispers that moved too quickly never ended well. Clean-shaven, plain face, black suit that could have been bought from any shop on Oxford Street. He looked ordinary, deliberately so. But his voice carried the kind of institutional weight designed to press obedience from men in uniform. "You're being rotated out, Sergeant. Step back." The words cut through the ceremony like a thread pulled from fabric. Hale didn't answer right away. His stillness wasn't defiance. It was caution. He kept his breathing locked into parade rhythm, eyes fixed forward, shoulders squared. Outwardly, he was stone. But inside, something in him screamed. Afghanistan screamed. That quiet, bone-deep alarm that had saved him more than once when orders didn't add up. The liaison pushed again, a little sharper. "Don't make this hard." And that was when Hale knew it was wrong. Guards weren't rotated mid-ceremony. Not here, not ever. The only exceptions were clear. Sudden sickness, a confirmed breach, or a direct order delivered by a superior officer. None applied. He wasn't sick. The forecourt was calm, controlled, and there wasn't a superior officer anywhere in sight. It stank, because Hale had learned the difference between true authority and people pretending. He'd seen it in dusty Afghan compounds, Taliban fighters posing as allies, using false authority to draw soldiers out into kill zones. Survival depended on recognizing the difference, verifying before trusting, living by protocol, not pressure. "Sir," Hale said at last, his voice calm, steady, almost polite. "Ceremonial relief requires written orders or a handover from a superior officer. Neither condition has been met." The liaison's jaw flexed, the mask slipping for a fraction. "It's cleared through internal command." "Then the paperwork will follow," Hale replied. Silence stretched between them. The kind that isn't silence at all but wait. Air thickening, eyes turning. The faint static of something tipping. The man stepped back. Not far. Just enough to lift his wrist and murmur into the cuff of his sleeve. Hale's trained ear caught fragments, not cooperating, waiting on secondary authorization. That was enough. This wasn't about ceremony. Someone wanted him gone, and they weren't willing to use proper channels, which meant either they couldn't, or they wouldn't leave a trail. Neither option carried good intentions. Hale's pulse stayed steady, but his resolve locked into steel. He'd lost friends trusting the wrong voices. He'd watched soldiers walk into traps because someone higher up said, "Just follow the order." Never again, until someone with true authority stepped forward. He wasn't moving. Not for whispers. Not for pressure. Not for anyone. He would hold the line if it killed him. That was what guard meant. And then, she saw. From the royal platform, Princess Charlotte watched it unfold. She wasn't supposed to. Her afternoon had been scripted weeks ago. Where to sit, when to smile, how to hold her chin just so, for cameras. The staff had drilled her as they always did. Don't fidget, don't stare, don't speak unless spoken to. Sit still. Smile. Let the pageantry move around you. At 10, she already knew how to exist under endless eyes. How to be a figure without being a child. But children see what adults don't. Her father was busy speaking with a Japanese attaché. Queen Camilla adjusted her brooch in the sunlight for the press. None of them noticed. But Charlotte did. She saw the aides closing in on Hale. Their urgency sharpened, their gestures clipped. She saw Hale himself. Still. Steady. Unflinching. His face wasn't defiant. It wasn't afraid. It was aware. The look of someone being pushed toward something wrong, who refused to step forward. Charlotte recognized it. She'd seen that look on grown-ups who thought no child was watching. A teacher bullied by a headmaster. A servant pressed to say yes when they wanted no. The quiet unfairness adults always ignored. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't danger like bombs or crowds. It was something subtler, colder. The unfairness she already hated. And then, for the briefest moment, Hale's eyes flicked toward the platform. Toward her. Their gazes met. No smile. No nod. Just a quiet understanding. She knew what it meant to watch someone stand alone. And she decided. Maybe they didn't have to. The aides were certain resistance was temporary. They moved with practiced confidence. 3 men in suits approaching as though the ground already belonged to them. Palace staff. Inner command. The machine that kept royal life smooth. They had dealt with stubbornness before. Vendors, journalists, even politicians. A ceremonial guard refusing orders? He was decoration. Replaceable. The crowd didn't notice. Not yet. Music still rolled through the courtyard. Cameras still clicked. A few tourists lifted phones, curious at the cluster of suits near the guards, but nothing more. The lead aide stopped before Hale. Silver-haired, clipboard in hand. His voice clipped, sharp, expecting obedience. "You've been relieved. Step aside. No rank, no ID, no uniform. Just words and expectation." Hale's reply was calm, measured. "Protocol requires written orders or relief by a superior officer. Neither you nor your colleagues qualify." The aide's mouth tightened, not used to being questioned by someone decorative. "This comes from Her Majesty's office. Don't make it harder." Hale had heard that line before, in places where making it hard meant keeping your squad alive. Fake authority always dressed itself in borrowed names. "I'll stand down when proper protocol is followed," he said. "Not before." The second aide stepped in, irritation seeping through. "We can make it official right here, right now. Is that what you want?" Hale's whisper carried 12 years of weight. "Do it." The air itself seemed to pause. Because they couldn't. Not without tearing open their own lie. They had expected compliance. Instead, they'd run headfirst into a soldier who knew the rules better than they did, and someone else had been watching. Charlotte was already moving. At first, no one noticed. Her steps were small, precise, learned from endless lessons about posture. She rose from her seat with such subtlety the cameras kept clicking elsewhere. But by the time anyone realized, she was halfway down the steps, powder blue coat stirring, gently in the breeze. Gasps rippled outward as recognition spread. A princess, not waving, not smiling, walking with intent, walking towards something real. By the time she crossed the forecourt, silence had taken hold. Not ceremonial silence, but the heavy, electric stillness of history when it first cracks open. Charlotte stopped before the aides, her small frame set against their dark suits. Chin lifted, not arrogant, certain. She didn't look at Hale, she looked at them. He stays. 2 words. Clear, sharp, final. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was a living thing, heavy and expectant, stretching across the forecourt like a sheet of glass no one dared shatter. Cameras fired in frantic bursts, their clicks replacing the music that had just moments before filled the air. The lead aide, a man who had rehearsed protocol his whole career, opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. His training had given him answers to every possible breach of order. But this wasn't in the manual. There was no guideline, no clause in royal tradition for a child countermanding orders in front of the watching world. A single whisper cut the air. It wasn't meant for the crowd, but the microphone hanging on the edge of a camera stand caught it clean. "Jesus Christ!" The words weren't reverent. They were stunned. The kind of instinctive gasp that slips out when history tilts on its axis. And because his mic was live, the whole row of journalists heard it, freezing in the knowledge that they were witnesses to something rare, something raw, something that defied stage management. Princess Charlotte didn't explain herself. She didn't turn to the aides, didn't lift her chin in defiance, didn't so much as glance at the crowd. She didn't need to. Her meaning was written in every line of her stance, steady, calm, unflinching. This wasn't rebellion. This wasn't spectacle. This was protection, plain and simple. The instinct of a child who had chosen to stand between a soldier and a crown that demanded his removal. The aides faltered. They were men trained in logistics, not moments like this. Their eyes flicked instinctively, to the platform, searching for guidance. And there, framed in the gold light of Windsor's late summer, Queen Camilla was already rising. The look on her face was unmistakable, fury etched into every line, royal authority hardening her posture. But Charlotte didn't turn. The Queen's anger rolled toward her like thunder, and still she didn't flinch. Charlotte had made her choice. Behind her, Sergeant Rowan Hale stood like he had always stood, motionless, rigid, rifle balanced with parade ground precision. But something inside him shifted. For weeks, for months, maybe for years, he had carried the weight of vigilance alone. It was the soldier's burden, never letting your guard down, never forgetting the danger beneath the ceremony. Yet here, on the polished stones of Windsor's forecourt, a child had stepped into that solitude. She hadn't lessened it, no one could, but she had shared it. And for the first time in years, Hale didn't feel like he was standing against the tide by himself. The crowd felt it too. Tourists, reporters, dignitaries, they all knew instantly that what they were seeing was no longer pageantry. This was no longer a performance, no longer tradition wrapped in scarlet uniforms and brass fanfares. This was history in motion. And history, as it sometimes does, was being written by the least expected hand, that of a 10-year-old girl. Then came the voice. Remove them both. It cut across the forecourt like a blade. Sharp, cold, unyielding. The voice of monarchy in its rawest form. Not shouted. Royal commands rarely are. They didn't need to be. The weight of centuries spoke through them. 3 security officers shifted, as if compelled by the very force of the order. Their movements were subtle at first, but unmistakable. And they weren't moving toward Camilla. They were moving toward Charlotte and Hale. The air snapped tighter, charged with a sudden recognition. This wasn't ceremony anymore. This was confrontation, and yet no one moved, not fully, not decisively. The musicians froze mid-note, their instruments raised in an unfinished chord that hung in the air like a question. Aides, halfway through their steps, stalled. Even the seasoned royal security, men who had carried out orders without hesitation in embassies and war zones, stiffened. Because now, between them and their task, stood a 10-year-old princess. Charlotte didn't scream. She didn't cry, didn't stamp her feet, didn't call out for anyone to help. She didn't even speak. She simply stood where she had chosen to stand, small but unwavering, her hands at her sides, her posture as controlled as any adult could dream of. Her expression wasn't fear, wasn't anger, wasn't even defiance. It was certainty. Certainty, so pure it radiated from her like sunlight. She wasn't performing. She wasn't rebelling. She was protecting, and every lens in the forecourt caught it. Every camera framed her. Every journalist knew instinctively that this moment, was going to be the image replayed for decades to come. The princess, standing before the soldier and behind them, the weight of tradition straining to decide whether it would bend or break. Behind her, Hale felt the atmosphere thicken until it was almost solid. This wasn't Afghanistan. There were no roadside bombs hidden under dust, no bursts of rifle fire echoing across fields. But in a way, it was just as tense, just as dangerous. Because this was a battle too, not of blood, but of meaning. A battle for dignity, for principle, for the thin thread of trust between ruler and ruled. Quiet, bloodless, but no less real. And now, he wasn't fighting it alone. The aides exchanged uneasy glances. One man lifted his hand toward his radio, his thumb hovering over the transmitter. Then he hesitated. He knew, as they all did, what the optics would be. Cameras rolling, thousands of witnesses, millions more who would see it replayed. No one dragged away a princess, not when she stood to shield a guard who had broken no law, violated no rule, committed no crime but refusing to vanish on a whisper. On the platform, Queen Camilla's jaw tightened. Her hand gripped the armrest as though, steadying herself, her voice, when it came again, was colder, harder, iron hammered into words. I said remove them. The command struck again, heavier this time, the authority of crown and tradition, but still, no one moved. The silence had become a living presence now, pressing down on every person in that forecourt. Each second stretched into eternity, thick with the knowledge that the next action would define not just the day, but something far greater. The guards remained at their posts. The musicians still clutched their instruments in suspended chords. Aides held their breath. Reporters pressed fingers against shutters but didn't dare speak. Even the tourists, bewildered by what they were witnessing, understood that they were on the edge of something extraordinary. Because in the middle of Windsor's shining forecourt, beneath banners and brass, between crown and soldier, stood a child. And with nothing but her stillness, she had made the entire world pause.